So February presented an interesting dilemma for me. Between working on that particular monster and my schedule currently being eaten up by other things, it hasn't left me with much time to cover a lot of the newer releases this month. While I have been doing my best to keep up, a lot of the stuff I've been hearing has, for the most part, been very Which, oddly enough, is one of the two reasons why I didn't originally touch on these two particular albums this month, the other being, well, Satan. I originally just couldn't think of much to say about these two, but as I've been spinning them over time, two very different reactions have occurred, and I feel that they're both worth discussing. Also, Baby Metal doesn't come out until next week, so in the meantime... First, let's talk about Of Mice and Men's latest, Restoring Force, and at the risk of showing my hand a bit early, I'd say it's a pretty weak title overall. Between this and Save Rock and Roll, what is it with bands naming their albums these insanely hubristic titles? All it does is open the floodgates for dickheads like me to make shitty puns at their expense. Restoring Force, more like Restoring Snores. Hey? Facetiousness aside, I will say that this album isn't particularly bad for what it is. This is metalcore, and for that particular genre, it isn't the most incompetent thing I've ever heard. It does have some nice energy and a few chunky breakdowns here and there, but that's really all it has going for it. It's so safe and vanilla, and there isn't much on here that I haven't heard done better in 100 other places, really. There isn't a lot of color or creativity in the guitar work. Heard one dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun over an obnoxiously slow drum beat, heard them all. I know that's kind of par for the course for this genre, but the instrumentation, while competent enough, is blander than cheap toothpaste. Between all that and the lead vocalist sounding like they were doing an unflattering impression of Chester Bennington, it did little to impress overall. When I first listened to this album, I thought it was okay, but nothing particularly stellar, but with the passing of time, my opinion seems to slowly disappear. Not deteriorate, not worsen, just disappear. I've probably given this album at least 5 good spins, and I still can't remember any particular chorus, riff, or downbeat, and even when writing this script, I agonized for a good 3 minutes over what the bloody album title even was. This album was a lot like mediocre Chinese food in that respect. It's alright, it satiates if that's what you're in the mood for, but it certainly doesn't leave you wanting more, and after a couple of hours you forgot you've even eaten and you just get hungry again. I've heard better, I've heard worse. This album gets 3 unnecessary seashells out of 5. So while A Tale of Two Cities, or whoever they were, started off okay but evaporated quicker than a fart on a plummeting elevator, the Dum Dum Girls' latest seems to have had the opposite effect on me, starting off bland but getting sweeter and sweeter with each bite, like eating the tail end of a bowl of Lucky Charms after you've eaten most of the non-marshmallow pieces. It's a pretty atmospheric release overall, utilizing lots of synths, distortion pedals, and drum machines to create a nice sort of poppy gothic feel. There are more than a few subtle and not-so-subtle nods to bands like The Cure, Suede, and Susie and the Banshees, but also a few slight dashes of the Cult and Silver Sun pickups in places. Dee Dee, that's the only name I can find for this person, so that's what we'll call her, does have a very pleasant, alto-ish kind of voice, and her singing style does fit the tone of the tracks particularly well. It all has this nice, sort of gloomy, sort of dancey feel to it. Songs like Rimbaud Eyes and Too True to Be Good have nice punchy beats and catchy choruses, while Are You Okay and Trouble Is My Name do a good job at mixing up the pace of the album without dragging it down too far into the doldrums, something other albums don't accomplish quite as well. Though while this album did grow on me over time, it still does have some pretty noticeable flaws. It could be argued that Dee Dee's vocals aren't the most explosive or intense, and if you're uninitiated to the band like I was, it might take a few listens to really get into the mood they're trying to build. The tracks can sometimes feel a bit homogenous. But that's the thing, the more I listened to this album, the more those tracks I didn't care for started to stand out. Little subtleties I didn't catch on the first listen really started to blossom through, and I began to appreciate the album more for it. Whereas with Restoring Force, the more I listened to those songs, the more I seem to forget about them. Don't get me wrong, it's not the most enthralling thing I've heard so far this year, and I'm of the opinion that the best albums don't have to bug you like Navi from Ocarina of Time in order for you to appreciate them, but for whatever it's worth, this album does grow on you, and if you feel up to a night of dancing like this, it's worth a look. Dum Dum Girls Too True gets 4 Chupa Chups out of 5.